So welcome everyone. This is the September edition, I guess, of Turf Tuesdays for 2023. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Jim Brosnan with UT Knoxville. Excited to see this series continue. It's hard to believe we only have one more left for 2023, and have already started to get requests for topics and people for 2024. They go fast. But for today, we're going to have a special guest with us, a repeat customer, if you will, a repeat guest on Turf Tuesdays. But before we get into the details of today and what we're going to cover over the next 55 minutes or so, just want to go through a little bit of official business. I know that many of you are here today for your pesticide certification credits, whether that is pesticide recertification in Tennessee or South Carolina or Georgia, or one of the many states for which we have been awarded recertification. Everything that you need to do to get that pesticide credit, you did at registration. There is no action needed on your end other than staying with us for the duration of the hour. When you registered for this session, Zoom asked you what state you wanted pesticide recertification in and to provide your license number. That information will be used to populate the rosters that go to state departments of ag to get your licenses all up to date and where you need to be. So there is no action needed for pesticide accreditation for anyone. At the end of the session, you will see me put up a code on the screen for golf course superintendents who may be with us today. Those are continuing education units for golf course superintendents only. There's nothing to do with pesticide. We'll log that on the GCSAA website in order to keep their continuing education up to date. The session is being recorded. The archived video will be posted on YouTube, on the UT Turfgrass YouTube channel. And then the audio from this session will go onto the Turf Tuesdays podcast feed on Apple Podcasts. So if you are watching this or listening to this as a recording, unfortunately, there are no pesticide credits associated with archived viewings as of yet. Hopefully that will change in the future, but as of right now in 2023, we can't do any pesticide accreditation for an archived view, be that video or audio. And then last but not least, questions. We do get several questions as we go through these, and myself and my colleagues here with us, Dr. Brandon Horvath and his graduate student, Dylan McCallum, we're going to try to shepherd all those questions through the Q&A box that you see in the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question for any of us or for our guest today, type that in the Q&A box. It's pretty helpful. It keeps things threaded. It allows us to link answers to specific questions. We will do our best to answer all the questions aloud during the session, but if we miss them, we can type responses back to you in that Q&A feed. So I think that covers all the nuts and bolts official business. As I mentioned in the beginning, our guest today is a second-time guest on Turf Tuesdays, Dr. Jeff Marvin with PBI Gordon. Jeff, I've known you for a long time. I think we met back in like 2013, 2014, but most of the people that are listening probably are unfamiliar with you if they're new to Turf Tuesdays. So welcome, number one. And to start, why don't you tell the folks that are with us who you are and what you do with PBI Gordon and what they're all about?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So, as you said, Jeff Marvin, I lead our product development team here at PBI Gordon. So within that, we've got now 4 researchers throughout the United States. Our most recent hire, Dr. Seegers, out in Bend, Oregon, Dr. Nardi in State College, Pennsylvania, Eric Razor down in Dallas, Texas, and Chris Williamson up in Ohio. So great team of researchers. I get the privilege of working with them, but we take a look at all the new stuff coming to PBI Gordon. So you've seen some of the new things here this year and previous years, but obviously work closely with the likes of you and Dr. Horvath, looking at new AIs, new formulations. A lot of great work at Tennessee and some other locations. I've been with PBI Gordon now just over 12 years, in this role, or a couple different roles within the company, but all R&D focused.
And you guys have really grown. I mean, I know I started at Tennessee and gosh, now like 13, 14 years ago now, 2008-ish. And, PBI Gordon was always around, TriMet Classic has been a thing since I was a little kid. But your footprint in the industry has really grown, and, you guys have really put a lot of work into product development and have had some new tools come into the industry that have been success stories. Yeah, any of those come to mind as a real highlight for you? I know when we first met, I think it's when you first got access to the active Invexus. Like the paperwork was just signed and you were happy to talk about it.
Yeah, no, Jim. So my first interaction with Primisulfan and Vexus started in 2011 internally as the research station manager. 2 years later, I oversee our field group, and that's really where I think you and I first truly met. I know we probably crossed paths at some of the national conferences, but my first interactions of visiting Tennessee and placing work, 2013-ish, give or take. But yeah, so we launched Vexus Primisulfan late 2018, and then here recently with the liquid variation of that, Archon. But our operating goal, right, is outpace the market. And as you said, I think we've seen some really nice growth over the last 3, 4, 5 years. I think we've had a much more focused approach to how we go to market, trying to bring tailored solutions to our end users, whether that's LCO, golf, sports fields, things like that. We're trying to take a new look at what we bring to market.
And what's implied but not stated there is that there's something in the market to buy, right? And that's kind of what we're going to touch on today. You were kind enough to come to the Turf Conference in Tennessee back in January. We had a supply chain roundtable because that was an issue that was first and foremost on a lot of folks' mind, and I think probably still is. I mean, my sense is it's better, but maybe not what it was pre-COVID. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, I mean, so you rewind to January, and we were on stage talking about I couldn't source bottle caps. I couldn't source labels just to try to put a product in the market. Knock on wood, I think right now, especially the last 6 months, that supply chain is, at least from PBI Gordon's perspective, has definitely righted itself. We don't have the materials issues that we had from a bottle, the cap, a label. I think in January I was speaking to MCPP, supply. There was some issues there where it was very tight. I think that's finally kind of corrected itself somewhere around that May, June timeframe this year, where everything kind of fell into place. The original manufacturers, MCPP, got up and running. Some additional supply came online. So I think as an industry, when you look at that three-way type herbicides, obviously when you look at PBI Gordon, we're trying to make 992, we're trying to make Classic, back into a position where, again, we want to be a reliable supplier and have supply on hand that we can ship when needed by our distribution partners. So yeah, you go back 8, 9 months ago, labels, bottle caps, the jug, all of that was a problem. Right now, I think from my perspective and our company, a lot of that's been righted. MCPP, as we talked about back in January, was going to be tight early on. We're now in a good position when you look at those three-way herbicides. But even your premium branded herbicides, Speed Zone, T Zone, things like that, that MCPP is in, we have a good source. There's additional sources that have now come online from that front. So industry-wide, I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, and maybe give the folks listening some perspective, on, we have a lot of lawn care folks that listen, a lot of extension agents that are listening and are familiar with the products. How does something like three-way that or 992, let's call it, how does that get to the shelf? You talked about sourcing MCPP, right? And I don't know that everyone that's listening to us kind of understands that you may see a jug on a shelf that says PBI Gordon Trimec 992, but you're not really making the 992, like you're not creating the 2,4-D per se or synthesizing the chemistry for MCPP. Can you shine some light on what goes in to get a product into a 2.5 gallon jug on the shelf?
Yeah, Jim, so that's a great question, right? I mean, when you look at 992, you look at the number of supply channels that go into a product like that, right? You gotta have the container to put it in, the label to put on it. Then you have the actives, all the co-formulants that go in there. You're probably easily talking an interaction of 10 plus supply partners that you hope all of those supply partners are in lockstep. And when we ask or we have demand for a product that they're able to supply, and like I said, you go back, even 9 months ago, but COVID, that definitely was not the case. So we bring in MCPP, 2,4-D, dicamba from different supply partners. You have the logistics of a lot of that's international. So you're looking at shipping product over water, which is longer than I would have anticipated, right? You're talking weeks to ship a product over water. It's going to come into a major port where potentially it sits for another couple of weeks going through the customs process. So that's where when you talk about supply, I mean, we rely on our distribution partners in the forecast of, okay, we know when your call for demand is, so that we know we're placing the orders downstream at the right time and we're expecting material on time. It's the never ending dance, with supply partners trying to arrange transit. I know we've had some issues, I think, where we've heard, a couple of supply partners to say, arranging that over water transit. One company may say it's an 8-week process. Another company may say it's a 4-week process. So trying to find that right partner on there. It's unique. Like I said back in January, Jim, I mean, I've learned more about supply chain than I ever wished I would have going through this process. But I tell you, it's been an interesting ride.
Any sense of like, you have a lot of liquid products in your portfolio. Any better with granular products in terms of getting through supply chain, worse with a granular product going through supply chain, or kind of no different?
I wouldn't say it's any better or any worse. From the standpoint now, when I look at just the Vexus, when you look at that carrier, right now we're not forecasting or seeing any supply chain issues. I would say you're on the supply side 6-9 months ago from a price point, it was more on the fertility side where you're seeing some of that pinch. That's not where PBI Gordon plays. We're not into that fertility market, so we didn't feel that pressure near as much. When you look at what's on a Vexus, we're all the inert carrier. It's a corn frill, a clay type carrier, and right now that's been pretty consistent, and probably even during COVID was maybe a little more consistent than some of the liquid product.
That's interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting too, like how every industry felt it. Ag chem felt it, but you look at like the steel in our business, mowing equipment wise, they felt it. They might have felt it worse and are probably still dealing with some of the lingering effects of that in terms of there's so many parts that go into a mower, and if one of those parts isn't there, that mower's not going forward. So that, like you said, it's definitely something there's a new appreciation for, I think, for everybody who does this.
Yeah. So what our end users, what our distribution don't see, right? During the midst of COVID, PBI is undertaking a $30 million renovation of one of our plants. So you're trying to do this renovation. And Jim, as you just hit out, when you look at parts, you look at product materials that go into a renovation. I think our team has felt that issue as well. And again, finally, you kind of seen that light at the end of the tunnel now, where building materials, on demand and supply when needed. You're also seeing some of that cost come down. I know, talking to a neighbor of mine that's in construction, and he's bidding a product or a quote for a project, and it's good for 30 to 60 days because that material was changing ever so quickly, in price point. So I know we felt that pressure internally during our renovation as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up pricing, and that's a good segue. And we last year in September for Turf Tuesday, we focused on EOP. And the rationale in that was a lot of folks who join us might not be familiar with EOPs and what they are and what they do. Moving forward from that, did the supply chain hurdles that you felt affect your EOP program at PBI Gordon?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jim. That's it's interesting, right? When we look at rewind the clock, 9 months, 12 months, and we were looking at the price of raw materials coming in, and use a term that we use, our finance group, purchase price variance. On the books, let's say 2,4-D, we had it priced at X. When it was in short supply, it's difficult to come by, it was X plus 100%, X plus 200%. There were some increases that you just can't forecast. I mean, there was no way to forecast the 200% increase. I think the highest increase or percentage increase that we've seen was maybe a 400-500% increase on some of our co-formulants. So one's no way to forecast it. So you look back a year ago, PBI Gordon took the stance of, we're not going to change price in season. That's difficult, right? For an end user, you go into a season with a budget. For distribution, you go into a season with a budget. We held firm on price, and then finally, coming into last year's EOP, a fairly significant price increase, which I think probably sent some shockwaves through the industry a little bit on, wow, this is a fairly large increase, whereas it was a single increase where some of our competitors were looking at 2 or 3 in-season price increases. So some differences in strategy there between us and our competitors. Coming out of that, I think this year EOP, we recognize, hey, we need to change some things, and I know what we're calling our green dividends, so part of the EOP, I think you're going to see some really strong offers on some of our key products. When you look at the zone products, Feed Zone, T-Zone, the fungicide lineup from Segway, from Budo, Tech, and things like that, we're going to make some really strong offers to kind of get back to where, again, price to value. We hope we're supplying our end users with a product that provides value, but at a price that meets what they need to do.
Do you, and this is a little speculative, but do you sense greater participation in EOP programs now that prices have gone up industry wide? I mean, Brandon and I have been privy to some pricing information, and it's been pretty eye-opening to see what some products cost these days. And I'd just be interested to know from your side of the industry, do you think there's more participation in EOP now than there was maybe 3 years ago?
I would say yes. I think it's an incremental increase year over year on participation. When you look at the total incentives baked in, and I'm looking at our program, when you can save $10 and $15 a gallon on a product, I mean, that's, or on a SKU, that's big. No doubt. So I think you're going to see that continued drive on EOP. I know for an end user, it probably puts them in a tough spot because you're trying to forecast the weather, right? I mean, you're saying, do I need to bring in all of this fungicide, or do I need to bring in all of this, herbicide, and not knowing what weather patterns you're going to see here coming in 2024. So I know it puts some pressure on them, but I don't see the EOP process going away when you look at the sheer savings potential that you can achieve.
Well, and we talked about this with the group last year. And just to reiterate, I mean, I think the golf industry is very familiar with this. But when I look at like the lawn care industry, for example, well, I don't know how much participation there is in lawn care compared to golf or EOP, and the nature of the lawn care business sets up that one could really make a lot of use of this. I mean, if you're managing a lawn care outfit and you know you have X number of properties, and every year you're going to make, you know, 4 to 6 or 7 rounds, depending on what part of the country you're in. And you kind of know, at least conceptually, what you're doing in each one of those rounds in terms of what your targets are and what your goal is in going there. But you kind of have a feel for what your overall product need is going to be, right? And, you know, if you're buying a pre-emergence herbicide for 250 properties and you know how much you need, well, there's a substantial savings if you buy it all in EOP and you do it early.
Yeah, no doubt, Jimmy. You know, it's a unique scenario, and for the listeners out there, I'd be curious what their take on it is. When you look at lawn care, you kind of go into those winter months. From my perspective or understanding, there's also some of that uncertainty of those winter months you look at customer retention and client retention. And do I want to have this big spend, you know, October, November, December, not maybe fully understanding what that retention looks like March, April. It's a unique dilemma for sure for that LCO front. And I'd be curious what some of the listeners would, you know, what their thoughts are on that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do you guys have anything in EOP right now? I know you mentioned your green dividends program, and I know on the herbicide side, you're launching Archon as a liquid formulation of Vexus. Do you have anything that you're super excited about EOP for this year that you're just curious to see where it lands?
Yeah, so you hit on, I mean, Archon for sure, right? I mean, that's been 2-3 years now in the making. Trying to bring out a liquid version of Permisulfan, knowing that liquid version is probably a little more or easier to use for a professional. Right? When you look at LCO, when you look at golf course, you know, I think they'd rather use a liquid version versus the granular. Granular has its fit for sure, but definitely looking forward to the Archon side of it. The ease of use, one, just I think reliability when you look at that liquid versus the granular. You're not as reliant on soil moisture in there. You know, we had to claim when you have the granular, you had to water it in within 24, 48 hours. So with this liquid, you're definitely getting some foliar uptake and activity on that. But overall, like I said, I mean, I think PBI Gordon is making a big swing here from just a total incentive, total rebate. And you look at our entire portfolio. You know, I'm really excited to see where kind of September, October take us on that front.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, and on the Archon front, I think one of the things that stands out to me with it, having worked with it for a few years, is, you know, the fact that it's going to be labeled on greens and it's safe on greens. There's very, very few products that hit the market today with use directions for putting greens. You know, there's a lot with a do not use on greens, and there's some labeling by omission where greens are just not labeled, not mentioned. But the fact that it's specifically labeled for greens use, I think, is pretty significant.
Yeah, no, Jim. I mean, you kind of hit on too. We just had an internal training on an Archon with our sales group, and a couple of sales reps were asking that same question of, okay, if you have Palang or sedge on a collar of a green, can you spray right up beside it? And you know, absolutely. We showed a couple of photos where when you look at this class of chemistry, right, that ALS chemistry, can it move? Potentially, sure. But what I was telling our sales group is, even if it moves, like you said, you're labeled on greens. If you spray on a perimeter that's on a slope and you get some movement into the green, not concerned at all from an injury standpoint. So it is. I think it's a really nice tool.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, going back supply chain wise, you know, this might be a hard question to answer, but what's the weirdest thing that there was a shortage of?
The weirdest thing that there was a shortage of. I mean, I'd probably go back. I mean, just like I said, we picked source of we're ordering bottle caps at a couple dozen at a time. We call a local janitor supply company and say, do you have this bottle cap? And we buy, if they had 2 dozen of them, we buy 2 dozen of them. That was that's one of the oddest
A
items.
little different than train cars, right?
Yeah, you don't think of a bottle cap kind of holding up the process. You take for granted. I mean, you walk into a grocery store, the peanut butter is always in that plastic container. It's not an issue, right? It's no, that had to have been the biggest issue. When you look at the raw materials, the active ingredients, I think we all anticipated some of that. But now I don't think you could foresee the bottle cap, the label, finding a print press that was running and you had time on the line to print a label for you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier about shipping too. Give the listeners a sense of, a lot of the actives that you're sourcing from Asia. They shipping through California. I know there was a period where maybe a year ago it was actually more economically feasible and you could get the materials to yourself faster, not shipping to California, shipping through the Panama Canal and coming into like Savannah. Is that still the case?
Yeah, no. So there was a huge, bottleneck when you looked at California. I think you had freight containers that were, I want to say easily month, 2 months. So, container arrived in California, and you were a couple of months before it even made its way through customs from a labor perspective of not having labor power to move those. I know in the midst of COVID, we made the decision, we air freighted product into Chicago, places like that to try to speed things up. Absolutely. I think the East Coast ports didn't feel that same burden that some of the West Coast ports did, but even there, coming into Florida of Baltimore, I know there were some delays when we tried to bring product in. When you look at MCPP supply coming out of Europe, delays on that front as well coming into some of those ports. And that's one of the things that, I think most of our end users and customers don't really hear, but when you look at MCPP, we were making the decision to air freight product into Chicago at, I don't know what the cost was, but it was exorbitant, right? When you look at flying a couple of super sacks, a couple tons of MCPP in, but again, it's a decision that we made internally to, if we're going to be a reliable supplier, it's a step that we're going to have to take.
Is there anything that's still, it's gotten better, the shipping's better? You talk about things that are normalized. Is there anything that still is an outlier where, maybe it's questionable, like it's good for now, but it could break anytime soon in terms of not have, the pipeline drying up?
Trying to think on the container side of it. Occasionally you still hear some rumbling around that when you look at what we call totes, or that 275 gallon type tote you buy in bulk. I think there's been some rumbling up there. Just what's the supply look like from that front? So when we're, a big LCO, or even shipping some of our active, right, come in totes. So the active may be in source, but we don't have that vessel or container to put it in. Over water, still logistics still seem to be somewhat of a hiccup. I think it's getting better, but when you look at lead times, 2017, 2018, where they are now, I think we're still seeing some increased lead times on that front.
I think it's got to be really hard to, balance all this with, when you're talking about products that are already labeled in the market. At the same time, your group as others are sourcing materials for things that are experimental with the hope that it will become labeled and navigating the same hurdles. And then we're in a world where the process of getting something from okay, we have the data, we know that this does what we want it to do in a reliable and repeatable way across a large geographic scale. You get to that point, the process from there to actually getting the label, it's kind of unpredictable how long that would be, right?
No, absolutely. So, take Archive, right? I mean, that's our latest launch. It's now labeled, but going through the registration process, 2, maybe 3 90-day extensions onto what was originally required, right? When you look at roughly a 9-month process turned into almost a year at the federal level. I think you look at states, there's still a little more lead time at some of the states on that front. For sure, there's definitely hurdles on the registration front.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I know for those listening who have been to campus and walked Brandon's plots or visited with me over wheat science plots, you see a lot of experimental stuff that's numbered. It's easily a decade. I think that's a fair estimate from getting a numbered product to you see it on the shelf available for purchase.
Yeah, no, it's we just had a conversation internally, right? Looking at one of our AIs that we looked at it this year and last year with Tennessee, and if I can get it to market in 2031, 2032, I'd be thrilled, right? That's it's crazy to think about it. For myself, you got a 20-year, 25-year career with PBI Gordon eventually and I'm doing the math. I'm like, man, I'd be really thrilled if I could launch 3 new products in that time frame. It's crazy when you think about it in that perspective. But no, it is. It's just, when you look at the work that has to go in the front end from soil dissipation, that side of it, well, then taking that, moving it into the EPA.
Well, and this is, it's a little bit of it. Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
I was just gonna say, Jeff, what's the current cost estimate from soup to nuts for a labeled product from experimental to introduction to the market? Is it 300 million now?
Yeah, easily. If you're a basic, yeah, absolutely. I think you're in that ballpark, right? When I look at PBI Gordon, we're not a basic company, so we're going to source a guy from somebody, and
you're sourcing an active ingredient once it's already gone through tox and all the other stuff, right?
Yeah, we're sourcing it, post discovery. So the ability for these BASF, the Bayer, right, to manufacture, synthesize a molecule. I mean, huge expense on the front end of that. Screen it. Is there activity there or not? So we're getting it downstream from all of that, and what PBI is looking at then is, can we take it and register it? The process of registering a tech grade product in the U.S., if it's not been registered, I mean, you're looking at anywhere, I'd say $8 to $10 million just for that. So there's some huge bills out there. It's a large sum of money that goes into that process.
Well, and for those listening that are unfamiliar, I mean, we all are, but you're also under a ever ticking patent clock, right? So then your ability to recoup that investment, every day it's not sold is one day lost to recoup the investment. So that's another reason why aside from all the stuff we've talked about with inflation and supply chain, like that's just another reason why the prices they don't go down. Right?
It's the crystal ball, right? If I know product has a fit right now, we can look at it out there at the research station and say, man, this looks really good in these plots. And I'm looking 10 years down the road saying, okay, is it still going to be needed? What is somebody else co-developing alongside of us, right? A competitor that are they coming to market 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road where now I have to reevaluate it. It's just really a fit now. It's there's a lot of crystal ball, a lot of swag of, man, I think in 10 years this is going to be needed, but it's still a bit of a roll of the dice.
Well,
Well,
and to that point, so one of the things that I think the supply chain thing has done is it's forced, particularly in the golf market for sure, but I think it's forced people across, the various segments of our market to reevaluate how they're using, not just products, but equipment and things like that. We've seen a huge push into autonomous mowing technology right now because of the supply chain issues, not because, but that's kind of pushed people to consider it where maybe they wouldn't consider it before. Look, I'm just going to renew my lease package and I'm going to be good to go. Where, now they're looking at, gosh, I renew my lease package and I'm looking at, a year and a half before I even get it. And I can go over here and buy this, autonomous equipment right now and it's available and I can, get this party started. When you guys are looking at those kinds of things changing in the market, how are you looking at what we need to change in terms of application technology and things like that to be able to accommodate end users that are moving in that direction?
No, absolutely. So, one of our, within PBI Gordon, we have some accelerated growth goals, right? And some of that's, Brandon, what you're hitting on, that precision turf management is what we called it. And how do we want to play in that? But when you look at what I would say is a current formulation now is probably not going to fit the bill for some of these new devices coming to market. I look at some of the work, I think, Texas A&M's looking at that aerial drone application. I know Dr. Askew there at Virginia Tech's doing some of that work. And when you look at that, when you go to a aerial application, some of the formulations we have, I know they're not going to work in that scenario. So what kind of, drift reduction agents do you need to put in there? Is the packaging right? Is it really a 2.5 gallon jug that you need when you look at that type of application? Do we need to get to a much more concentrated version? Now it's something that we definitely are looking at. And man, I'll tell you that precision turf market is changing so quickly. You see technology, just year over year. When you look at how quickly technology is moving in that market, and then trying to keep up with it from a formulator front, it's a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you think one of the things that came up with a project that I've been working on recently is just thinking about like spray volumes, right? Like you think about a typical application on turf, you're at 44 or 88 gallons per acre of spray volume. You look at an ag, application volume, you're at, 15 gallons per acre. And I think part of that has to do with the density of the canopy, right? Like, right here, like you're trying to hit all those plants where when you're working in a crop system where plants are planted 18, 19 inches apart, anything that's hitting the ground is kind of wasted product. So you're trying to get that spray volume light enough that it hangs in the air and gets covered on those plants that are spaced apart. So that's part of the problem. But to that point, if you start using like an aerial application drone or a small autonomous mower type applicator that has some sort of boomless spray or something like that, that's going to completely change the mindset and how we go about applying some of these products. And we're going to have to optimize how those products get applied. And that's one of the questions I've always wondered about, when we put a small plot out with a CO2 sprayer versus a 500 gallon tank that has an agitator and a centrifugal pump. What are the differences between those two applications, even though the application volumes might be similar and so on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think, Jim, like said, a lot of LCO folks on here, and you see it when you go from a golf course type, just conventional equipment, right? With a 200 gallon spray rig
to a spray gun,
to a spray gun to your low volume applicator. You just take a white clover, for example, right? I mean, when you look at that low volume applicator going over white clover, that dense canopy, I think at times you get good application to that upper canopy, but then you don't get that penetration down to that lower canopy. So what seems like a miss is just we weren't moving product, uniformly. Brandon, to your point, we weren't moving product uniformly over that entire target. No, it's definitely something that, when you look at the AIs, when you look at, and credit to Dr. Sampson here at PBI Gordon on our formulation front, what co-formulants can go in there, either to improve that spread right across the leaf surface. How can we change particle size to get kind of mitigate some of that drift movement risk as well?
And I think we're going to have to do more of it too. I mean, all the points that Brandon raised about the precision market are right on the money. And then if you really want to dig deep into some of the Endangered Species Act mitigations that are on the table as things go through re-reg, a lot of what's listed is about drift. And there's things there I think that are actionable for turf, and there's some things that maybe would be a little bit more difficult, but some of the low-hanging fruit stuff is nozzle selection and droplet size and things that we just haven't really, I think, fully flushed out in turf like they've done in ag. And yeah, I mean, whether EW formulated product is going to set up well for an air induction nozzle versus a regular flat fan T-Jet 8002 XR, like that's something we got to figure out, and there'll definitely be more of that.
No doubt on that front. Is there you mentioned kind of that EW, the SC front. What does that look like? Certain states regulations on VOCs, right? So you cut out some of those petroleum solvents, but our initial discussion, this goes back to supply chain. When PBI Gordon made the decision to go from your traditional EC type formulation to an EW or an SE, a lot of that was supply chain driven. When you look at the impact of hurricanes, and you look at the Texas coast, we made that decision. So it was 2013, 14. Seemed like Houston, once a month was getting hit with a tropical storm or a hurricane, and we're seeing that impact on all the petroleum solvents that are going into our products. So that was a driver on, why did we go to an EW or an SE? It's supply chain driven. And then you look at it, Jim, from your front, when you talk about nozzle and you look at what does an EW look like coming out of, your traditional flat fan nozzle compared to an EC. What is your, micron wise, less than 115 micron or something like that, or your fines that are readily available to drift, right? So what does that impact have? And I think it was kind of a secondary benefit that when you went to these EWs and SCs, you saw less fines when you look at your traditional nozzles. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. While we get close to our end here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to see if I can figure out how to make the tech work, because I already screwed it up once today. And I'm going to put this up for our golf course superintendent friends in attendance. This is your GCSAA event approval code for today. Today's date is September 5th. Your event approval code is right here. I won't read that out because that's a mouthful. Do know that if you are watching this archived on YouTube and you log this into the GCSAA event website, you want to make sure to list today's event date, not the date that you watched the recorded session. And then again, this has absolutely nothing to do with pesticide credits. I know there's always confusion. I think every episode we've ever done, people get confused about the GCSAA piece versus the state pesticide accreditation piece. And there's no linkage there. This has nothing to do with pesticide credits at all. So I guess to kind of wrap things up, Jeff, is there anything we missed, we didn't cover? I mean, this kind of reminds me a little bit like the turf conference session where this was first and foremost on everybody's mind, and we talked about it, we flushed it out, and then you kind of get to a point where you're like, I don't know how much there's left to talk about.
No, like I said, I think from a high level, I guess maybe it's put that end user and distribution kind of more at ease of, from my perspective, I look at supply chain. I really think we're seeing a leveling off on that front. And I think we even picked up on some of that internally when you look at, our distribution partners. There was a point in time where I think if you were a distribution partner, if we had a product, you were buying it just because there was that uncertainty of, is it going to be in stock 3 months down the road, 5 months down the road? So I think even on that distribution side, you're seeing a kind of a course correction coming out of COVID where, we're seeing some of our distribution partners that would carry 130, 140 days of inventory. And you're now seeing that scale back a little bit to where it was pre-COVID, where you're looking at 60 days, 90 days worth of inventory. So that's a good sign, I think, when you look at that across the board, to kind of have that course correction, get back to where we were coming out of or going into COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I've heard of some chatter about product shortages here and there for different AIs from different companies. And like you said, I mean, the chatter was louder probably in May than it is right now. And hopefully that means we're past it and everything is normalized, because we're going to get into an EOP season where there's going to be a lot of ordering here. That's probably, I don't know the details of all of it from every company, but my sense is some have already started.
Yeah, they're coming out now.
They're coming out now. I know internally our sales group they've started having those conversations with partners on our green dividends. So it's going to go through September, October into November. Really, those 3 months will be very significant for early order.
So the last question I have for you before we wrap, we've had 2 pathologists on this summer on Turf Tuesdays, and we asked this question to them, and it was interesting. So I'm going to ask this question to you. What is your Mount Rushmore of turfgrass herbicides? You can do AIs, not product names, just herbicidal active ingredients. Your Mount Rushmore.
Speaking of, what do I wish I had, or what?
Just kind of
The 4 most consequential turfgrass herbicides.
Or most
ever.
consequential turfgrass herbicides. Okay.
it could be yours or somebody else's, just
Yeah.
that have affected the industry in a way that's memorable.
So when I look at PBI Gordon, 80% of our portfolio has either 2,4-D, dicamba, or MCPP.
So you're contractually obligated to say some sort of auxin group 4.
That would be like on the face of
Yeah.
Mount Rushmore. It would be the 3 molecules.
No, 2,4-D, right? 2,4-D is huge. And when I look at that as Mount Rushmore, you look at the cost of 2,4-D and what it brings to this market. That's huge, right? That's significant. Mount Rushmore, I would throw glyphosate in there. I know it's gone under pressure, but I'll tell you what, when you look at what that AI brings, and you're seeing the ramifications of it, we're seeing it. PBI Gordon, we had to take a barrier product that had glyphosate and azapir and replace it with 5 different AIs. I mean, that's third one I would probably throw out there is something from the ALS chemistry. When you look at grassy weed control, without a doubt. And then the 4th, boy, I tell you, it's got to be a pre, whether it's a CBI or a mitosis. Man, take your pick on that pre. Good, yeah.
I was gonna say, it gets interesting when you start looking at like use patterns, and it's interesting.
I don't know if I was gonna throw out one. probably the mitosis inhibitor, right? When you look at
Mhm.
price and value and the spectrum of what they provide, and the longevity that they've had, would probably be
Yeah.
the fourth, if I'm not Rushmore.
Yeah, for sure. Well, awesome. I'm sure at some point where I'm least expecting it, you'll ask me the same question, and I look forward to that.
Oh, that was a good question. That was it's
But
interesting.
I appreciate you coming on, Jeff. It's always fun to talk with you and the PBI Gordon team. So thanks again for your time.
Oh, well, yeah, appreciate it, Jim and Brandon. Like I said, I mean, I know this without saying, I mean, PBI Gordon and a lot of folks in this industry wouldn't be where we are without Tennessee and the other universities out there. I mean, just some really good work on your behalf, but all of the folks out there at the academic level. It makes our job easier, without a doubt. So thanks for having me, and yeah, appreciate it, and looking forward to the next episode, hopefully.
Yeah,
Jeff.
our next episode will be first Tuesday in October. I guess it'll be Casey Reynolds with TPI, and he's going to talk about the sod checkoff and give us an update on the status of that and where it's headed and what it could do for the industry and all things sod. So until then, hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and we will see you in October.